Welcome back to Dark Corners Streaming, and something a bit different this week. Every year, our Patreon supporters get access to an exclusive year-long series, usually based around the films of one particular filmmaker. When we chose Roger Corman this year, we had no idea how poignant a choice that would end up being. This is not a tribute exactly, it was shot months before he died, but hopefully it conveys some of why we love Roger Corman, his films, and how he made them. The passion and the fun. I should warn you, these videos are a bit rough and ready, but that actually kind of feels appropriate to the subject.
Hello, Dark Cultists. Welcome back to 50 Weeks of Roger Corman. Now moving into the 1960s and starting with a 1960 film, one of his best-known films of all time, although arguably not for reasons that are anything to do with him. That's The Little Shop of Horrors.
Oh boy, look at that! It grew! It's almost a foot long.
Isn't it empirical?
So if the 1950s films really show Corman sort of learning his trade, getting to grips with being a director and with the process, then the 60s is really his peak as a director, and in lots of different directions, as will become apparent as this series goes on. Corman had already made a film called Bucket of Blood. Please check out our review of that on streaming. He said it proved he could make a film in 5 days. He made Little Shop of Horrors just to break that record, according to him. Some sources say he made it as a bet. Mel Wells, who's one of Corman's collaborators during this period and who appears in Little Shop of Horrors, says not. Corman says it might as well have been a bet in an interview, so I wonder if people have taken that out of context and maybe said, but I would assume it wasn't made as a bet. It really was just to see if he could do this, I think.
Oh, that's remarkable.
Speaking of things that Corman said, again, this film is covered quite not extensively, but in his autobiography, but it's certainly covered. Corman doesn't cover anything extensively in his autobiography. It's an extraordinary book for getting through his career as rapidly as he possibly could. Far too busy to write an autobiography. In that book, Corman does claim to have invented black comedy horror as distinct from comedy horror. Obviously, comedy horror goes right back to the silent era, notably some of the old Dark House movies. But yeah, there's quite a lot of that sort of thing. Black comedy, I suppose, is distinct from it. Comedy where deaths are presented as funny. I think it very unlikely that Corman invented the genre. Very unlikely. But off the top of my head, I can't immediately think of other good examples. I can think of films which have an element of dark humour to them. This is straight black comedy all the way through. Nothing else. Written by Chuck Griffith in similarly short order, and Griffith, I think, deserves maybe not an equal share of the credit, but a very large share of the credit, that's for sure. And as we'll see, is involved in this at all stages. It was originally going to star Dick Miller, who had been the star of Bucket of Blood, and was written kind of with him in mind, but Miller turned it down. All through Corman's career, you get what he said versus what other people say. It doesn't really matter. But Corman said he thought that Miller turned it down because Miller didn't think it was possible to make a film in 2 days, that it was just going to be terrible. Miller says he turned it down because the character was too similar to Bucket of Blood. In this case, I'm kind of minded to believe Miller because it's not like he's not in the film. He is still in this film. He just takes another role.
Oh, here are your carnations. Wait, I'll wrap them for you.
That's all right. I'll leave them here.
I mean, if he thought it was going to fail, why would he be in it at all? It's a relatively substantial role, just not as large as the hero. Either way, Miller himself said he did regret turning it down. Look how that one went. And, you know, nobody made a musical out of Bucket of Blood, I think is the main thing. Miller ended up playing a different character, the one who eats flowers.
You know, those big places, they're full of pretty flowers, expensive flowers. When you raise them for looks and smell, you're bound to lose some food value. I like to eat these little out-of-the-way places.
One of many sort of like comic eccentric characters in this film, something that I will come to in more detail. And the lead was taken by Jonathan Hayes. If he's not best known for this, then he's best known for being the person that Corman discovered at a gas station on his first film. I say discovered. Jonathan Hayes never made it big. He was Roger Corman's go-to guy, and then he sort of traded off of being Roger Corman's go-to guy and had a perfectly reasonable career just having been sort of that guy. I don't remember if I talked about it in any detail when we covered that particular film, which was Monster from the Ocean Floor. He I think he grew a moustache for the role and lost his job at the gas station because of that, and so became an actor. Just a classic showbiz story. Also written with Mel Wells in mind for the part of Mushnick.
And it was so beautiful just a few seconds ago.
Excellent. Just a few seconds ago, I gave away dozens of carnations free to Mrs. Shiver.
He did accept the role and is fabulous in the role. I think it's probably the best thing that you'll see Mel Wells in. Mel Wells is not an actor with a great deal of range, but give him a silly, over-the-top character that thinks a lot of himself, and really you can't go far wrong. He's very fine in that respect. And he also did a bit of second unit as well. We've actually reviewed some of Mel Wells' films for regular Dark Corners. So he did a bit of everything. Talking of the second unit footage, Wells was sort of supervising that, but it was shot largely by Griffith, who was interested in getting into direction, so Corman gave him this chance. So again, when Corman says he shot it in 2 days, Griffith said Corman did 2 days, we did the nights, and some other shooting as well. So it was shot in a very, very short amount of time. Anyway, a lot of the street scenes that you see are Griffith's work. For extras in the movie, or sort of like the street extras, they just paid homeless people in loose change. I think Griffith mentioned giving them like 15 cents to fight or to be in the film. I couldn't see a film that any of them fighting, so I don't know. There's so much nonsense talked about this film. There's stuff that happened and stuff that didn't. And you're sort of picking apart the legend from what actually happened. Griffith also plays the burglar who comes into the shop to try and rob it, and is the voice of Audrey 2, Audrey 2, sorry. You're always thinking about the musical as well. Of course, it's Audrey 2 in the musical.
It's an Audrey, too.
In the original film, it's Audrey Jr.
Well, I named it Audrey Jr.
You named it after me.
So Griffith was just meant to be sort of like the stand-in voice for Audrey Jr. He was standing off camera and saying the lines,
Feed me.
so that Jonathan Hayes had something to react to. But then when they came to do the redubbing, they thought, oh, well, that'll take time and we'll have to pay someone. It's fine. We've already got a voice on the soundtrack. So arguably, it's perhaps not as great a vocal performance as you would want, but Griffith was at least giving a performance so that Hayes had something to play off of, and he wrote the part, so I guess he knows how it goes, and it's fine. Again, everything about this film is sort of like time and money, on which subject I haven't been able to double verify this, but apparently it's the same score as from A Bucket of Blood, which Corman used in 7 films. I'd want to look into that more, because that's an IMDb fact, so may not be accurate, but I really hope that's true, because it feels very, very in keeping with everything else about this film. It was shot on 2 cameras to save time, kind of like how you'd shoot a modern sitcom. There is a sort of an almost sitcom feel to it, because it is, I think, all but one shot where people go into the store and you see sort of like the reverse, but it's all the rest of it is shot from one side, from like an audience perspective. Again, save time. It's one setup. Everything's in the right place. You can shoot 2 cameras, so if you have a conversation, you're covering both actors, or you can have a close-up and a wide shot. And Corman said he never really shot that way. For this, it was all about the time. What saves it from feeling sort of like stagey or like a sitcom is that the camera, despite there being 2 cameras, the cameras are still very mobile. There's a lot of movement in this. There's a real energy. This is something I'm going to come back to again and again and again. Is that the energy is what defines this film, both in its style and in the actor's delivery. It feels as if this is a film in a hurry, which of course it was, but it doesn't exactly feel rushed. There's sort of a difference between something that's moving quickly and something that feels, oh, we've got to get this done. And it's quite a subtle thing. The pace of it doesn't hang around long enough for you to ask what is going on, or to realise that last joke wasn't really very funny, but it was silly enough or shocking that you just laughed in the moment.
If hit by a truck, call your physician. Alcoholic contact, 98%.
It does that sort of thing well. It's something it almost has in common. I always used to say this about the Marx Brothers movies, especially the early ones. The clip at which the jokes come mean that if you didn't like that joke, or if it was kind of a clanger anyway, there'll be another one along so quickly that you won't really realise that it wasn't that funny. Yeah, and you just laugh, and then you laugh at the next thing, and it's sort of like it's like an avalanche laughter. It just gathers more stones as it goes down. The plant, which of course is the focus of this. I'm assuming that everybody knows the plot of Little Shop of Horrors. That's the other difference. I don't think it's important, but the musical is Little Shop of Horrors. This is The Little Shop of Horrors. If you were looking to look them up on IMDb and needed a really clear difference. For those who don't know the plot, it's about a man-eating plant. The plant looks surprisingly good. It looks better and better as it gets bigger and bigger.
You may have been a crummy dentist, but you were a nice fella. I never meant to kill anybody in my whole life. I've killed 2 in the last 2 days.
When you have the sort of the little plant, then I think putting detail onto that was kind of a pain, so I'm not sure they really bothered that much. And most of the time that you hear it talking, then it's when it's little, and it's just there's no animation to it. It's just opening and closing. There's none of the trouble that they went to in the Frank Oz film.
Feed me, Krelborn! Feed me now!
But when it gets bigger and they're able to just like add more stuff to it rather than have to do fiddly little work, then it looks pretty good, I think. For what you're never exactly buying into it as anything other than what it is, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, do you know what a giant man-eating plant looks like? It doesn't matter.
I just killed a man. I'm a murderer. You think it's fun to be a murderer? You think it's fun to haul around a sack full of food? Oh.
The other famous scene in it, I'm just sort of like hitting bits of this film that are worth mentioning because I think everybody knows the story and because it's fun to do so. It just drags you along through it. The dentist scene is, of course, a very important one.
Oh, you are going to get it!
In the sense that it's such a key part of the musical. It's really completely left out. Seymour, the lead character played by Jonathan Hayes, has toothache. We've seen the dentist earlier because he was going to buy flowers. It's really just an excuse for another body to feed the plant. There's no real reason. I always used to think Corman must have had access to a dentist's office and that's why the scene is in there. That doesn't seem to be the case. It's not shot in an actual dentist's office. So I don't know if Chuck Griffith had toothache when he wrote it, and I imagine this was just written in a stream of consciousness. One of the major changes that the musical made was to make the dentist Audrey's boyfriend, which is a brilliant thing to do.
You got the handcuffs?
They're right in my bag.
I dare say if this was written over a longer period, they'd have thought of something like that. It makes a great difference. It doesn't really matter in the Corman film because, again, you're moving too fast to care. And yes, it is another body, but it's just much more affecting with that more personal link.
The guy sure looks like plant food to me.
Having said that, how those two got together in the musical is something you just never have to ask yourselves. Why the hell would she have agreed to go out with this terrible man? You assume it's because she's got low self-esteem, but still.
I didn't even deserve a sweet, considerate, suddenly successful guy like Seymour.
Another part of this film I absolutely loved, and which I'd forgotten completely when I sat down to rewatch it, is the police.
Dennis, Farb.
Dead?
Missing.
Clues?
Blood in office.
Where?
Skid Row.
Ideas?
None.
Check it out.
Yeah.
They're spoofing those sort of terse, hard-boiled encounters between police that I guess you got in films at the time, sort of starting to come into TV. I think we're more familiar with them from TV. And so the police are just talking that one sort of gravelly monotone, just trading cliches back and forth.
So you know him.
And my dentist, he maybe did something.
Disappeared.
Blood in his office.
The other man, too. Blood in the railroad tracks.
A few spare parts.
Dr. Farb is murdered.
Is he?
No, who knows? Not me.
Which is very funny, but it also gets all of the information across with speed. Again, it's all energy. It's all about just like getting through it. And they're very funny exchanges. I think that I'd completely forgotten the police, and they're brilliant.
Looks like they're getting away, Joe.
Yes, you're right. Let's catch him.
Right.
Sometimes that sort of serendipity is alongside really good filmmaking. So they had access to a tyre yard for one reason or another. We have this location, let's use it. So the chase scene is set there. And you know what? It looks great. It really does. It's a good chase scene. And that, I think, more than anything, is where Corman is using what he's learnt in the 1950s films, of which, as we've discussed, there are an awful lot. It was a great workshop for him to sort of learn how to be a good director. Where do I put the camera? So with something like this, he's able to come into a situation and not think, oh, right, okay, how do I light this? What do I do? He knows what he's doing. So everything can be set up very, very quickly, and you can get the best out of it in a very short time. And it's a genuinely exciting climax to the film. It's great. Elsewhere, what's most interesting about Little Shop of Horrors from a point of view of Corman's development as a filmmaker is that sometimes what he's learned from the early films is just confidence. And I talked about that quite a lot last time with the shape of Machine Gun Kelly. It's not necessarily he's taking filmmaking lessons into that stuff is almost incidental. That what I think mostly what you get in the Little Shop of Horrors that he's learned is just to be himself.
I need food.
And you can see that also in the House of Usher.
Is there no end to your horrors? No.
And the Poe films, but in a very different way. Those are different sort of like aspects of himself. This is just running wild and believing that you can do this, that this will work, that if you have those basic elements in place, then you can almost do what you want. You can just let your instincts take over. In practical terms, he's definitely learned from the early films movement and energy. When Jonathan Demme sort of came into the Corman ambit, and when he was directing his first film, he said that Corman took him to lunch and basically gave him his rules of filmmaking. And amongst those was sort of like move the camera wherever possible, use interesting angles wherever possible. And that's the sort of stuff you can absolutely see in The Little Shop of Horrors in much more fully realised form than it is in those early films. Mostly about camera movement. Like I say, it has a real vitality, this film. I said I'd keep coming back to it, and I will. The other thing I think that he's really learned is to do with characters. Corman films have always been focused on character interaction. And we've talked about that as one of the things that set him apart from a lot of other B-movie filmmakers, that he takes the plot as like it's just this thing, we'll get to it, but he allows the character interaction to be a really big part of it.
You can talk. I got a talking plant. Say it again. Me.
What's notably different here from those early films is that even the minor characters have a character.
Shiva, just point to anything in the store and it is yours.
I mean,
That's right.
the cash register, maybe, huh?
That's at least partly due to Chuck Griffith, of course, but still. And they are almost exclusively eccentrics and weirdos. Every person who comes into this shop makes their mark in some way.
I happen to represent the Society of Silent Flower Observers of Southern California.
And it's not necessarily a plot mark, it's keeping you interested, because it's just, what is this new thing? What is going on now? It keeps it alive, keeps it moving. As a film, this is just never still. There's always the next thing. It's a fantastic film for people with a really short attention span, because if this scene is boring you, if this character has become tedious, there will be another along in seconds, and they will be completely off the wall.
Have you no sympathy for your poor mother? Laughing at her and mocking her illness, and she's got one foot in the grave?
Like I said, all the characters in this are just, it's like they have just said, okay, what's this person's thing?
And that one, and I have to have this one, Seymour.
It's only one, too.
Seymour, who is the dentist here, you or me? Are you practicing dentistry without a license?
So, like I said, you have the Dick Miller one who eats flowers. Of course, you have the Jack Nicholson character, who you sort of have to mention. This is really Nicholson's, in a way, I mean, it's a very small role. He plays the dentist's patient, the role taken by Bill Murray in the musical version, so the masochist. And Nicholson remembers it as Corman not really wanting him for that role, envisaging someone older. So Nicholson came in, decided, all right, I've just got to go for broke for this. I've just got to make it completely my own and do it in a way that's so memorable he can't not cast me.
Now, no Novocaine. It dulls the senses.
This is gonna hurt you more than it is me.
Oh, goody, goody, here it comes.
And God love him, that's what he did. A better indicator of where Nicholson was going to go as an actor than the starring role that he had in Crybaby Killer, or a lot of his early roles for Corman.
All right, punk, we'll settle it man to man.
Like before, Superman, 2 or 3 goons hold me while you do the punching?
Not because his later roles are necessarily wildly over the top, but because it's a performance. It's an actor going for it, rather than just being what he stands out on the screen, which he does not in Crybaby Killer, really. He has a certain charisma, but it's you wouldn't say this man can be a star. This man can draw the eye. This isn't a starring role, but it's a performance that you take away. And sometimes, certainly in the early years, what an actor wants is to be remembered, so that casting people will say, "Oh, that guy, I recall him," and that's enough. The characters in this are, like I say, they're ridiculous, but they're fantastic. They bring the film to life. As long as you are willing to live in this mad world, then yeah, you can't really complain about that stuff. And yet, for all this, what I'm saying about it just being completely off the wall and nothing making sense, and a lot of it is sort of left out, you don't really need it for the story, it retains that basic Corman storytelling.
And I've noticed that the places that have the most weird and unusual plans do the best business.
See?
That there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. It all adds up. For all, however stupid it is, however ridiculous, there is a very basic plot. And that I am tempted to ascribe to Corman more than to Chuck Griffith, because that's almost always been the case with Corman. It's why his B-movies worked. And it seems like such a basic thing, and yet so many people got it wrong, that he was starting from saying, all right, this is the structure, this is what happens, I don't care what else happens in it. And I do think that's probably what he said to Griffith, just go as mad as you want.
I didn't mean it.
Why did you say it?
Oh, food.
You didn't even say that.
Oh, yes, I did. I said it.
Oh, I'm looking right at you.
Well, I'm a ventriloquist.
You're what?
A ventriloquist.
Feed me.
Those building blocks remain. This is your story. Don't bring me something that doesn't have this story. That is why The Little Shop of Horrors works, because it's the combination of basic, solid storytelling and absolute insanity. This sort of wild, instinctive approach that Chuck Griffith almost had to take, writing a script in that time. It's like Spike Milligan used to talk about how he wrote The Goon Show, that it was just, he didn't know where it was going. It's just stream of consciousness. It was just pouring out of him, and whatever happened. That is how this feels, but within a really rigorous structure. And what I find most, not bizarre, what I think is most impressive about this in a way, and which I've sort of alluded to, and something I do think we forget when we talk about Corman's career, is that this is released August 1960. Fall of the House of Usher is the next month, September 1960. When you think of Corman's career, you think of all the black and white B-movie nonsense coming out, and then he made the Poe films, and a lot of it's all at the same time. It's just crazy to me. Those are two films that come a month apart from the same filmmaker. You put those films next to each other, and really, what do they have in common? And I'll answer my own question. What they have in common, firstly, is good performances. Usher, for the most part. Arguably, there are sort of the performances in The Little Shop of Horrors are perhaps more to the tone of the piece than all of the performances in Usher. Usher rests on a couple of performances, notably Price's, of course.
The House of Usher seems to you then normal?
But really, what they have is that they have a sort of a basic structure to them, and then they allow a lot of what I'm sort of referring to as instinctive filmmaking. Obviously, again, in very different ways. But I talked a lot in that special about the fact that House of Usher's plot is so thin, and it doesn't feel the need to have a traditional resolution. Both of these are Roger Corman as a filmmaker following his instincts. And that's what I mean, that in the 50s, he sort of acquired a confidence with which to do that. The knowledge that he could make a good film as long as he sort of like followed his own rules. And from there, he can do what he likes to some extent. He can experiment and it will still come out good. And these two films that couldn't be more different, but I think they come in a way from the same part of Corman's nature, that I am going to do this and this will work and I believe it will work.
Where is she?
I hope I'm expressing that well. But unlike Usher, The Little Shop of Horrors was not a big hit. It made its money back. It made a small profit.
Remarkable.
Corman was a little disappointed at the time, he said, because it felt like it deserved more. It was so wild. It was so out there. And it sort of got that more with time. It became a cult favourite. It in sort of like midnight screenings, college screenings, that sort of thing. It sort of found its place over time and made its money back and more that way. And then, of course, it became when it became a musical, then everybody went back to the original. But I think probably Corman has made more money from the musical version than he made from his original film. They both survive very well. If I remember rightly, then Griffith has some angry things to say about the division of money when it came to royalties from the musical. Yeah, that's another story. The only other thing I sort of wanted to touch on, just like in terms of what a big film this was, what an important film this was, or became over time, in terms of that sort of cult status, is that years later, Griffith was working with the great Michael Reeves, about whom we have also done a special quite recently. I would assume this was for the film She Beast, which Griffith wrote and again did second unit for, which was Reeves' sort of breakout as his first film as a director. They were talking on the phone one night, and Reeves told Griffith, "I've got to go. Little Shop of Horrors is on TV, and everybody's watching it." And this was just like a thing. It wasn't back in those days. It perhaps wasn't on TV so much. When it was, you caught it. Everybody caught it, and there was. I love that they show it, partly because it reveals something about Michael Reeves, but also it does show what a phenomenon this was. And Martin Scorsese remembers it as well. That it was like when that was on, it was an event. You went to see it because it was this mad film, and there's nothing else like it. And there's still nothing really else like it. Low-budget filmmakers today try to do this, but the problem is they try to do this. They don't try to make a film as good as they can within a limited amount of time, which is what Corman was doing. They try to do this. They try to copy Corman, and that's not how you make a cult classic. You have to follow yourself. You have to lean into yourself. This is a great example of Corman doing that. And later in his career, that ceased to be what he did. You can only, I think, do that for so long. But this is what I mean. This is why Corman's 60s output is perhaps his best. But yeah, another example of Corman leaning into himself, but in a very, very different direction. And it's extraordinary that all these films came out together. So next week, we're looking at The Intruder.
And I'm willing to give my life, if that be necessary, to see that my country stays free, white, and American.
Which again, from the early 60s, I think that's 61, all from this same era. Extraordinary to think that these are all the same director in the same period, and I maintain working with the same ethos of just leaning into himself. He has acquired the confidence to do this. That's my thesis on early 60s Roger Corman. It's been a delight talking about this film. It was great fun rewatching it. It really was.
Don't waste your pity on me, Audrey. I'm not worth it.
Who says you're not?
Everybody.
Yeah, I know.
I would recommend the original Little Shop of Horrors to anyone.
He means it.
And the musical to anyone. They are both brilliant in their own way.
No shit, Sherlock.
Different endings. So there's something to think about and a good point to end on. Hope you'll join me next time. Thanks for watching.
Saz, I've got to get home. My wife's making gardenias for dinner.
Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this. Please join us on Patreon if you want to see more. But more importantly, watch Roger Corman films. They may not all be award-winning. Some of them are terrible. But films made with love, with passion, with energy by people who were excited by what they were doing are always worth seeing.